But it's something to try. It's a chance. We might make it. If you stay here, you'll certainly die.
An ocean liner capsizes in heavy seas and a group of survivors attempt to make their way to safety, which is either a great premise for a disaster movie or a really bad way of advertising all-inclusive cruise packages.
You irresponsible bastard.
The Poseidon Adventure.
So that's the cat this ship is named after, huh?
That's right, Mrs. Rogo, the great god Poseidon.
The Poseidon Adventure is a 1972 disaster film that was one of the early 70s biggest hits at the theatres, at a time when it was thought that spectacle-driven movies were deader than a dodo's newspaper.
Linda, you hear me?
Will you shut up? I'm busy in here.
The Poseidon Adventure marked producer Irwin Allen's return to movies after working on television for most of the 60s. Now, we've covered this before, but he really liked oceanic-themed programs and films and messing about in boats, or in this case, messing about with boats. At this point, Irwin Allen wasn't yet the master of disaster. He was more of an apprentice of adversity.
You get your ass down here with us, mister, right away.
The disaster films of the 70s really did kick off with Airport in 1970, a movie series that would eventually run to 4 films that probably also bought George Kennedy 4 houses. It provided a template for this sort of movie. Pack the film with familiar faces, make it a little melodramatic, and maybe kill a few folks along the way.
You'll kill yourself for nothing if you explode that bomb. Stay where you are.
In that film, a plane is endangered, but the loss of life is minimal. In the Poseidon Adventure, screw that. We want a body count that would make Vlad the Impaler look like an amateur. The SS Poseidon is on its final voyage from New York to Athens. After the journey, the ship will be scrapped by its new owners, who insist that the captain get the ship to its final destination ASAP. The captain is deadly serious in his assertion that it is deadly serious to try and make the ship go faster in such dangerous and deadly serious conditions. At no point does the ship captain ever attempt to make you laugh, but for various reasons unconnected with the Poseidon Adventure, you're just waiting for a gag. There's no gag. This situation is deadly. Seriously.
Fair enough.
On board are a group of motley characters played by a number of Hollywood stars, or at least familiar faces, though there were a few up-and-comers thrown in for good measure. Collectively, though, this cast would have more Oscars on their shelves than a store selling Sesame Street merch. A group of passengers are in the ballroom of the SS Poseidon celebrating New Year's Eve. A health fanatic bachelor, James Martin. There's Robin and Susan, a brother and sister travelling to meet up with their parents. An older couple, the Rosens, travelling to meet their grandchild. Rogo's a lieutenant detective and his wife Linda, a former hooker. There's the singer Nonny. There's also Akers, a steward on the boat. And finally, there's Reverend Frank Scott, a rebellious preacher who sounds more like a podcaster selling supplements than a man of God.
Don't pray to God to solve your problems.
A powerful undersea earthquake sends massive waves in the direction of the Poseidon. Does it A. capsize the Poseidon? B. do absolutely nothing? C. launch Poseidon into a space warp? Now, if you answered either B or C, then kudos to your therapist on their brand new Bentley. Massive waves do in fact hit the ship, and no amount of deadly seriousness will prevent SS Poseidon from capsizing. The film's signature scenes show the people in the ballroom being thrown around like flubber-based firecrackers. Poseidon is left upside down with pockets of air in some sections, but that air will not last all that long, and the water's also not going to stay out.
I order you not to go! He knows nothing about this ship!
The ship's purser, possibly with the most sonorous overacting in this film, sings for the survivors to be cautious and do absolutely nothing. You know, if he survives this whole disaster at sea business, he really should audition for the opera. In the ballroom, a group of survivors regroup and follow the advice of young Robin, who's apparently memorized many facts of the Poseidon and similar vessels. Reverend Scott will lead a group of survivors through the upturned lower decks towards the engine room, where the ship's hull is apparently at its thinnest. Most of those in the ballroom who elected to do nothing and wait for rescue will end up drowning when walls of water start breaking through into the airtight compartments. Scott leads the survivors through the galleys, up here, down there, through there, and around that, up ladders and underwater.
But you expect a person to fit through there?
Mrs. Rosen, you're gonna crawl right through there, believe me.
Disaster movies would often be filled with hazardous traversal, with disheveled, sweaty people slowly making their way perilously past an obstacle. Much like me, a disheveled, sweaty person making my way perilously past the ice cream fridge at the supermarket.
I'm going next. So if old fat ass gets stuck in there, I will be caught behind her.
Along the way, Rogo and Scott will spar verbally over the right course of action. Akers is ever so attentive despite his wound, perhaps still expecting the survivors will leave him a nice fat tip. Susan has a crush on Scott. Nonnie is paralysed with fear and needs to be helped by Martin. They pass another group of survivors heading a different direction, and that causes all sort of existential doubts as to whether they're heading towards safety or their doom. Their number will be slowly whittled down. Akers falls to his death. Former champion swimmer Mrs. Rosen will save Frank from drowning, but dies herself. And because we haven't killed enough of them, Linda Rogo will also fall to her doom. Of the survivors, there's little moral judgment since none of the people who died were being in any way difficult or majorly obstructive. Though of course, it's 1972, so it's ex-hooker Linda who dies.
Okay, Nani, you're next.
No, with you. With you.
Perhaps Nonnie, whose fear slowed the group down slightly, but there's nothing belligerent or malicious about her. Of course, years later, every Blackadder fan watching this movie at home was getting roaring drunk after taking a shot and yelling, "Hey Nonnie, Nonnie," every time Carol Lynley appeared on screen. One last door remains and they're blocked by a jet of steam, which Scott manages to close, but he's kind of stuck, leading him to sacrifice himself. It's now up to Rogo to get the survivors to safety, exactly where they needed to be in order to be rescued. Huzzah! The search and rescue team do seem a bit nonchalant, almost like a cab driver at the airport pickup. They pick up a few survivors and think, yeah, that's enough.
What more do you want of us? We've come all this way, no thanks to you.
After spending the 1960s wringing every penny out of his television empire, producer Irwin Allen wanted to get back into movies. Paul Gallico's 1969 novel, called coincidentally enough, The Poseidon Adventure, hadn't been a massive success as a book. Now, while we don't have exact sales numbers, we can make a semi-educated guess and say at least one person read it. Irwin Allen thought Gallico's book would make a good subject for a movie, though he couldn't get 20th Century Fox to put up the money. He'd have the project bubbling away for a few years before he could finally get the film before the cameras. In the meantime, Airport had been released and had been a big success, though by the time Irwin Allen finally got Fox to greenlight his film, he'd end up with a budget of around $5 million to play with. Even at the time when movies had more modest budgets, $5 million was not all that much for this type of movie. It was barely half of Airport's budget. But for somebody used to TV budgets, that would not faze Irwin Allen, who had every scene storyboarded so that everything could be planned to the nth degree to maximise the film's modest budget. He enlisted famed writer Sterling Silliphant, someone known for serious subjects, to take a pass at the script, along with Wendell Mays. To direct, Allen hired British director Ronald Neame, who'd also been working on more character-based movies, though it does seem like Irwin Allen would be there right alongside Neame. But just before the film was about to enter production, a management change at Fox saw Poseidon Adventure cancelled. This studio had for years been alternating between huge successes and huge failures, and as part of the new studio regime's cost-cutting, Poseidon Adventure was an easy thing to cut.
Quite an ill-tempered fellow.
Allen began his hard sell to his new studio boss and ended up pledging to find half the financing.
It's up to each one of you. It's up to all of us, together. Now, please, for God's sake, come with me.
He asked two rich friends to guarantee the money, and then the film was back on. Some scenes were filmed on the Queen Mary while it was docked, with wind and rain machines making a clear day into a terrible storm, while Poseidon Adventure had some limited but very effective model work. The film's biggest sequence, the chaos in the ballroom as the ship was capsizing, was where the film was going to live or die, and much of it is done very well, though some of it comes across as a little goofy. The stunt performers generally sell the sequence very well. With the film's modest budget, the set wasn't constructed on a gimbal, but in order to upend it, a forklift lifted up one side of the set. While Allen was technically the producer rather than the director, he was often involved in directing some of the big action sequences, where much of the film's second half involves the survivors making their way through upside-down galleys and the engine room, which is a level of interesting production design that enlivens what could otherwise be rather dull crawling through tunnels and corridors. Airport had set the template, have lots of big stars and familiar faces, but it had twice the budget, so Poseidon Adventure tweaked the format. Just lots of familiar faces, where most of them weren't at the apex of their career, and in some cases had been on the other side of the peak for a while. Or by this stage, they were character actors rather than leads, while the film's big up-and-coming star was Gene Hackman. He'd been around Hollywood for a while, where he'd already been nominated for Oscars, but it was his turn as Popeye Doyle in The French Connection that would make him a star. He was filming The Poseidon Adventure when his nomination for Best Actor came through, and when he won, he would join Jack Albertson, Shirley Winters, Ernest Borgnine, and Red Buttons as people you would invite to dinner parties but later come to regret it. I mean, how do you win an argument about who was the coolest member of the Magnificent Seven with somebody who just responds by popping their Oscar on the table? Gene Hackman's Preacher Scott is less like a spiritual advisor and more like a cross between a motivational speaker and a high school football coach who's still really bitter about that knee injury that kept him out of the NFL. He's good, but Ernest Borgnine's really giving his role some welly. He's angry most of the time, distraught when Linda dies, and probably at his best when the film stops to explain suppositories.
You don't swallow them.
Well, what the hell are you doing?
Stella Stevens played Linda, who wasn't taking any crap from anyone.
You son of a bitch, go help him!
Roddy McDowall was Acres, who, despite his injury, never forgets he's in a customer-facing role, even when faced with imminent death. I just wonder that after he dies, will the survivors receive an email asking to fill in a customer service survey?
They boarded at Gibraltar. They're on their way to Sicily.
Pamela Sue Martin would later play Nancy Drew and appear on Dynasty. In a small role was Irwin Allen's wife, Sheila Matthews, playing the nurse, though history does not record whether she was ever referred to as Mrs. Disaster. And as the ship's captain, Leslie Nielsen. In the early 70s, he'd moved past his early career as an unremarkable leading man and settled into a relatively thankless routine of supporting roles. I mean, he appeared on Columbo twice and yet was never the killer. You know, that sort of thing. In Poseidon Adventure, he plays the ship's noble but doomed captain in a few scenes at the start, and at no point does he ever pass gas for comedic effect. I mean, honestly, I think the survivors had enough to deal with.
Damn it, man, the Poseidon is too fine a lady to be rushed to the junkyard on her last voyage.
The film did win some awards, for instance, Oscars for Best Visual Effects and Best Song. Of course, the film's score by John Williams is fine enough for what it is, but he was still in the period where his music seemed to be constrained by the expected style of movie music at the time. You know, he just had a few more of these disaster movie scores to go before John Williams could really let go and release the joy. The Poseidon Adventure is a solid film. It's one of the better disaster movies of the 70s, and it's one that has relatively solid acting from the main cast. It's well made and genuinely exciting for the most part.
Have you seen it?
It would be eclipsed by Allen's follow-up, The Towering Inferno, and rival film Earthquake, both in 1974, though The Poseidon Adventure proved that the disaster film genre had legs.
Climbing to another deck will kill you all! And sitting on our butts is not going to help us either!
When the film was released in December of 1972, the film would do very well, playing in theatres for many months and managing the magical trick of turning the $5 million budget into something like $125 million from its theatrical release. Hence, Irwin Allen would earn the nickname the Master of Disaster. I mean, as a nickname it has a certain zing, and in any case, it sure beats being called Knucklehead.
That's not true! It is true, you pompous ass!
Allen would eventually take over the directing of his films later in the 70s, but by then every fireman and his dog was producing disaster movies, and Allen's films weren't the draws that they'd once been. His 1979 follow-up to The Poseidon Adventure did not end well. Beyond The Poseidon Adventure sank without trace at the box office.
We're wasting time.
Director Ronald Neame would return to the genre the same year with Meteor, which similarly came crashing down to Earth. The Poseidon Adventure, though, still has its sea legs, with both a 2005 miniseries and a 2006 theatrical movie, Poseidon, turning up, but neither's really had the same impact as the 1972 film. When I was growing up in the 1980s, two of the big disaster movies were repeated on local television over and over: Earthquake and The Poseidon Adventure. But for whatever reason, Poseidon Adventure was the one that I ended up watching. I don't think I particularly enjoyed it in any major way. I just watched it because it had action and it was on. Watching it now, it's only a little dated in places and its effects have held up relatively well. The simple yet effective production design does half the job, and the cast really do sell their predicament quite well. Though honestly, Ernest Borgnine by far gives the best performance.
By the way, Happy New Year.
Thank you, sir. Same to you.
The Poseidon Adventure was a film about a cruise gone awry, enjoyable enough, and still one of the better disaster movies of all time. If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
Hey, nonny, my lord, good news!